The body camera footage had already been viewed 2.3 million times by the time my father's chief of staff called him out of a committee session to say his son's name was trending on Twitter. 47 seconds. That's how long it took for Officer Dennis Holt's 22-year career to start unraveling. The moment he grabbed my arm outside a sandwich shop on Clement Street, pushed me against the brick wall, and told me, loud enough for every person on that block to hear, that boys like me had no business riding a scooter that expensive in this part of town. He never asked my name. That was his first mistake. His second was not noticing the woman in the yellow coat standing 6 feet behind him, holding her phone with both hands, perfectly still. His third, and the one that would cost him everything, was not knowing whose son he'd just put in handcuffs on a Tuesday morning in April. But none of that is where this story begins. It begins on a morning so ordinary, I almost didn't bother saving it in memory at all. Early April, the air still carrying the last cold breath of March, the kind of San Francisco morning where the sun tries but doesn't quite commit. I'd lock my scooter to the bike rack outside a sandwich place on Clement and come inside for lunch, a pressed turkey on sourdough, and a coffee I'd been thinking about since 8 a.m., when I'd left my apartment near campus still running on 4 hours of sleep and the low-grade anxiety that comes with a thesis deadline 3 weeks out. I was 23 years old, a second-year master's student in urban policy at Berkeley, and I had 40 minutes before a meeting with my advisor that I could not afford to miss. My chapter on transit equity gaps in lower-income Bay Area corridors was overdue, and I'd rewritten the introduction twice already. I was not thinking about anything except the argument I was going to make about bus frequency and displacement rates. I was not thinking about the scooter because why would I be? It was mine. The scooter was a Segway 9bot Max, matte black, with a small scratch on the left footboard from a parking incident 6 months earlier in a garage on Durant Avenue. I'd winced when it happened because I'd saved up for the thing across 14 months of weekend shifts at a university research lab. Data entry, mostly. 4-hour Saturday blocks that I'd started as a sophomore and kept doing because the money was steady and the work let me think. I'd bought the scooter used from a classmate named Trevor who was moving to New York and didn't want to ship it. I had the bill of sale. I had the transfer filing confirmation from the DMV. I had my name listed as the owner in an email from the DMV's virtual field office dated 11 weeks earlier. The physical title was still processing. There was a backlog at the Sacramento office, 6 to 8 weeks. Totally standard. But I had every document that existed. All of it saved in a folder on my phone, organized, labeled, with the original seller's contact information copied into the notes field. I had all of it because 2 years earlier, my father had sat across from me at the kitchen table in our Sacramento house, not his office, the kitchen, over coffee on a Sunday, and said something I had tried very hard to file under Dad being Dad, and found I couldn't quite shake. He was still in his reading glasses, still holding the newspaper, and he set it down and looked at me the way he looks at me when he wants to make sure I'm actually listening and not just nodding. "Son," he said, "you are going to be stopped. Not maybe. Not possibly. It is not a question of if. And when it happens, I want you to have everything. Registration, insurance, proof of purchase, digital and printed, because the law will not protect you if you have nothing in your hands to show. Senator David Caldwell, California's 12th District, 8 years in office. Former public defender. My father, who knew the distance between what the law says and what happens at the side of the road better than most people who write the law. I'd laughed, the way you laugh at something you understand intellectually but can't quite feel yet in your body. The laugh that means I know you're right, but I'm not ready to sit with how right you are. He hadn't pushed. He just looked at me for another second and said, "Okay, son," and gone back to his newspaper. I was thinking about that conversation, the reading glasses, the Sunday quiet, the coffee going cold between us, while I stood at the sandwich counter listening to a voice cut through the noise outside. "Whose scooter is this? Somebody want to come claim this before I call it in?" I set down the sandwich I hadn't paid for yet and pushed through the glass door. He was a big man, broad across the shoulders, maybe 50, with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of sunburn that comes from years of outdoor work. He was standing next to my scooter with his arms crossed and his weight settled back on his heels, which is the posture of someone who has decided how a situation is going to go before it starts. His badge said, "Holt," in blocky letters. His eyes moved over me once, quick, and something in them shifted into a register I recognized immediately and hated with a completeness that I had long since stopped trying to explain to people who hadn't felt it. That particular calibration, that fraction of a second assessment, the way a set of conclusions clicks into place behind someone's eyes before you have opened your mouth. "That's my scooter," I said. I kept my voice even, my father's voice in my head. Calm is power. Holt's head tilted slightly to the left. "That right?" Not a question. A performance of skepticism, slow and deliberate, that he was not even bothering to dress up as anything else. "Yes," I said. "I parked it 20 minutes ago. I was inside getting lunch." He looked from me to the scooter and back to me with the unhurried patience of a man who has done this before and has never had a reason to expect it to cost him anything. "You got registration on that?" "Yes," I said. I was already reaching into my jacket pocket for my phone. "I have everything digitally. The transfer filing, the bill of sale, the seller's—" "Put the phone down." I stopped. My hand was halfway to my pocket, reaching for documentation he had just asked me to produce, and the instruction made no logical sense. But I stopped, and I brought my hand back to my side slowly, and I kept both hands where he could see them. Because this is what you do. Because this is what you are taught. Because every black man I know was taught this by his father, or by an uncle, or by the hard specific education of being stopped before, and understanding that the logic of the moment is not the logic of the law. "I was just getting the registration," I said carefully. "I didn't ask you to reach into your pockets," he said. "I asked you to put the phone down." "I heard you," I said. "My hands are visible. I'm not reaching anymore. I was trying to provide the documentation you asked for." He looked at me for a long moment. Around us, the sidewalk was doing what sidewalks do. People moving past, a few slowing down, the slight magnetic pull of a scene in progress. A woman in a yellow coat had stopped at the corner. A teenager was leaning against the lamppost across the street. The woman, I would learn her name later, Patricia Osei, a nurse coming off an overnight shift at UCSF, had her phone out. I noticed it the way you notice things when your peripheral vision sharpens into something almost painful, every detail arriving at high resolution whether you want it to or not. "Sir," I said, and I heard my own voice doing the thing it had learned to do. Modulated, deferential. Not quite apologetic, but adjacent to it. All the things I resented having to perform, but performed anyway because the stakes were not abstract. They never had been. They were standing right in front of me with a badge and crossed arms. "I own this scooter. I purchased it from a private seller 11 weeks ago. The transfer was filed with the California DMV. There's a processing backlog. 6 to 8 weeks is standard, which means the registration still shows the previous owner's name in the system. But I have the filing confirmation on my phone. It will take me 30 seconds to pull it up." He took one step closer, slowly, measuring. "This scooter was reported stolen this morning. Similar make and model. I need to verify ownership before you go anywhere." The cold moved through me differently than I expected. Not like a wave, more like a door closing. A quiet, solid sound that contains within it the whole shape of what it means. "It was not reported stolen," I said. "Because it is not stolen. It is mine." "Turn around," he said. "Hands behind your back while I run the plates." The cuffs clicked shut. That was the sound. Small, mechanical, absolutely ordinary in its components, that I would hear replaying in my head for the next 3 nights every time I tried to sleep. My wrists locked together behind my back, and the metal was cold, and the brick wall of the sandwich shop was rough against my shoulder. And somewhere behind me there was the sound of Clement Street continuing on as if this were not happening, because for everyone who was not me, it wasn't. I stood there, and I did the thing I do when I need to stay inside myself. I thought about the scratch on the left footboard. 6 months ago, Durant Avenue parking garage, late afternoon. The specific wince of having damaged something I'd worked 14 months to own. The scratch was mine. The scooter was mine. That was a fact, and it was going to remain a fact regardless of what was happening to my wrists right now. Officer Holt came back from his cruiser after what felt like a very long time and was probably 4 minutes. "Registration's coming back to a different name," he said. The transfer is still processing, I said. I explained this. It's a known DMV backlog issue. The filing confirmation is on my phone. If you allow me to unlock it. What's your name? He said. And there it is. That question. The one he should have asked before anything else. Before the crossed arms and the tilted head and the cold metal around my wrists. The question that is supposed to begin a conversation, deployed here at the end of one, after the cuffs were already on, as an afterthought, or maybe as a formality, something to write on the pad, a name to attach to a report that was already being written in his head. Marcus Caldwell, I said. He wrote it on his pad. His pen moved steadily. He was not a man who hurried. Then he looked up, and I watched something happen behind his eyes. The name not quite landing at first, not quite connecting, and then a small adjustment, a recalibration, a shift in the quality of his attention that told me the calculation had changed even if his expression hadn't. Any relation to Senator David Caldwell is my father, I said. I didn't say it to threaten him. I said it because it was true and because he was about to find it anyway, and I was finished performing ignorance of my own name. I'm his son. I'm a graduate student at Berkeley. I own this scooter. I have the documentation to prove it on the phone currently in my left jacket pocket, and I would like you to remove these handcuffs so I can show it to you. The silence that followed was a specific kind of silence. Not the silence of reconsideration, the silence of calculation. I'll need to verify that, he said. You're welcome to call his office, I said. Or you could look at the documentation I've been asking to show you for the last 15 minutes. He looked at me the way people look at you when you've said something accurate they didn't expect you to know. Then he looked at the scooter. Then he looked past me. And I think it was the first time he actually clocked the woman in the yellow coat, Patricia, standing motionless at the corner, both hands wrapped around her phone, pointed directly at his face. Something moved through his expression. Not quite recognition, not quite alarm. Something smaller and faster, gone before it settled. Relax, he said. I'm just doing my job. 3 words that have been used to explain so much distance between what is right and what is happening. Something in me went very quiet and very focused when I heard them. Not angry. Something past anger. Something colder and more purposeful that I had not felt before in quite this particular form. I understood in that moment that the version of me that walked into the sandwich shop 20 minutes ago was not going to be the same version that walked out. Something had shifted, the way tectonic things shift. Not dramatically, not with noise, just a slow, irreversible movement beneath the surface. With respect, I said, and my voice was the steadiest it had been since I walked out the door. Doing your job would have included asking my name before you put me in handcuffs. He didn't answer that. He turned back toward his cruiser, and I noticed his shoulders had changed, a subtle tightening, a new quality to the way he was carrying himself. And I thought, he knows. Not fully. Not yet. But somewhere in the back of his mind, a calculation had started that hadn't been running before, and it was not running in his favor. My phone, still locked in my jacket pocket, had received 4 missed calls while I stood against that wall. I would only find this out later. The first was from my advisor. The second was from my roommate. The third and fourth were from my father's personal line. Not his office number, not the press team, not his chief of staff. The private number. The one he used when he needed to hear my voice and nothing else would do. He had seen it already. Someone, somewhere, had seen Patricia's video. It had been posted while I was still in handcuffs. And it had reached the right person's feed and been shared to someone who knew someone on my father's team. And 6 floors up in a Sacramento state office building, Senator David Caldwell was sitting in a committee session not hearing a single word being said because his phone had just shown him a video of his son against a brick wall with his hands behind his back. I didn't know any of that yet. What I knew was the scratch on the footboard, the cold of the cuffs, and the way Officer Dennis Holt had walked back to his cruiser without answering my question. I knew the woman in the yellow coat was still there, still filming. I knew the teenager across the street hadn't moved. And I knew, with a clarity I had not asked for but was not going to waste, that everything that happened in the next hour was going to matter, that I needed to stay controlled, stay precise, stay completely inside myself. Because the moment I stopped being that, I stopped being the person who could make any of this count for something. Holt came back with another officer, younger, maybe 30, who looked at me and then at the cuffs, and then at Holt, with an expression that asked a question he didn't say out loud. "He's claiming ownership," Holt said to the younger officer with the specific emphasis of someone who wants another person to understand that the claim is dubious. "I'm not claiming it," I said quietly. "I'm stating it. There's a difference." The younger officer looked at me again. He had the look of someone doing very fast math in his head. "Can he show his documentation?" the young officer asked Holt. "He can show whatever he wants once I've run everything through," Holt said. "You've been running it for 15 minutes, I said. "What does it say?" Holt turned back to me slowly. "It says the registered owner is a Trevor Michaels of Oakland." "Trevor Michaels sold it to me 11 weeks ago," I said. "I have the bill of sale, the DMV transfer filing confirmation, and an email chain with Mr. Michaels that shows the date of sale, the agreed price, and his acknowledgement that the scooter was transferred to me. The physical title is in processing at the Sacramento DMV office. This is a standard 6 to 8 week backlog situation that the DMV itself has documented publicly. None of this is complicated. None of it is hidden. It's all on my phone." The younger officer looked at Holt. Holt said nothing. Patricia Osei, 6 feet away, was still filming. "I would also like to note," I said, keeping my voice completely level, "that I have been in handcuffs for 18 minutes, that I have not at any point resisted or attempted to leave, that I asked twice to show documentation before the handcuffs were applied and was refused both times, and that there are currently at least 3 bystanders filming this interaction, which I believe is my right to inform you of." The younger officer made a sound in his throat that was not quite a word. Holt's jaw moved. "Sir, you need to calm down." "I'm completely calm," I said. And I was. That was the thing. I was the calmest person on that sidewalk. My voice wasn't shaking. My breathing was even. The cold of the cuffs was still there, but I'd stopped feeling it. Everything in me had gone smooth and still and purposeful, the way my father looks in committee sessions when he's about to ask a question he already knows the answer to. "I am calm and I am cooperative and I am asking you for the 3rd time to allow me to show you the documentation for my scooter so that we can conclude this misunderstanding, and I can get to my thesis meeting, which I am now 22 minutes late for." The younger officer said quietly to Holt, "Maybe we let him show the phone." Holt looked at him for a moment. Something in the look communicated clearly that this conversation was not over between them. Then he turned back to me. "I'm going to remove the cuffs," he said with the tone of someone granting a favor. "You are going to unlock your phone slowly and show me the documentation. If everything checks out, you're free to go. If it doesn't, it will," I said. The cuffs came off. I flexed my hands once, felt the blood moving back into my fingers, and took out my phone. My hands were steady. I unlocked it, opened the folder, the one I had organized and labeled and kept precisely because my father had sat across from me at a kitchen table on a Sunday morning and told me this day would come, and held the screen out toward Officer Dennis Holt. He looked at it for a long time. Longer than necessary. The bill of sale was there. Trevor Michaels, Oakland, California, the scooter's serial number matching the plate, the date of sale, the agreed price of $480. Below it, the DMV transfer filing confirmation with a timestamp and a case number. Below that, the email chain with Trevor, 12 messages long, ending with, "Registration should clear in about 6 weeks. Standard wait time right now." "Serial number checks out," said the younger officer. His nameplate read, "Garcia," leaning in over Holt's shoulder. Holt handed the phone back to me without comment. He looked at the scooter. He looked at the street. He looked everywhere except directly at me, which told me everything about what was running behind his eyes, a fast private accounting of what had happened and what it was going to cost him, the numbers not adding up in his favor. "You're free to go," he said. Flat, stripped of everything. No apology, no acknowledgement, just the bare minimum transaction of releasing a man he had detained for 23 minutes on no basis he could defend. I didn't move immediately. I looked at him, and I let the silence sit for 3 full seconds because I wanted him to feel the shape of it. The 23 minutes, the 3 people still filming, the documentation that had been available from the first moment and never asked for until the 14th. "I want your badge number," I said. He gave it to me. His voice was completely flat. "And an incident number." Something moved in his face. This was a routine check. "It was not routine," I said. "You detained me, put me in handcuffs, and attempted to impound my property based on information that was incorrect. I want an incident number." Garcia wrote something on his pad and handed me a slip of paper. He did not make eye contact with Holt while he did it. I unlocked my scooter, put on my helmet, and rode away. I did not look back. My hands on the handlebar were steady. The scratch on the left footboard caught the April light as I turned the corner. My father picked up on the first ring. "Marcus." His voice had a quality I'd only heard a handful of times, not the composed Senate floor voice. Something quieter and more charged, the voice of a man holding himself very carefully together. "I saw the video." I pulled over to the curb. "It's already up?" "Patricia Osei posted it 19 minutes ago. It has 40,000 views." A pause that contained everything he wasn't saying. "Are you hurt?" "No. They released me." I showed the documentation. "Come home," he said. "Don't talk to anyone. Don't post anything. Come straight home." "Dad." "Marcus." One word. The full weight of the thing inside it. Not panic. Not anger. The focused gravity of a man who had been waiting for this call for 23 years and had already decided what to do about it. "Come home first. Then we talk." I came home. My father was in the small back office when I arrived. The one with the leather chair and the window facing the garden. The room he uses when he needs to think rather than perform. He was on the phone. He held up one finger without turning around. That gesture so familiar it almost hurt. Finished the call and turned to face me. He is not a tall man, my father. Medium height, trim, the kind of person whose presence is built from attention rather than size. He looked at me for a moment and then crossed the room and hugged me, his hand on the back of my head the way it had been when I was 12 and had fallen off a bicycle and was trying not to cry. Then he stepped back and looked me over with the cataloging focus that never entirely leaves a parent's eyes. "Tell me everything," he said. "From the beginning." I told him all of it. He listened without interrupting, his hands folded on the desk, his expression still and unreadable, which meant he was in the mode where every reaction was being conserved for use. When I finished, he said, "His name is Dennis Holt." Not a question. "Yes. 22 years on the force." Said the way you say something you've already looked up, which meant the 45 minutes I'd spent driving here, he had not spent waiting. There are 2 prior civilian complaints in his record, both from black men under 30. Both were filed, investigated internally, and closed with findings of insufficient evidence of misconduct. The cold that moved through me then was not surprise. It was the grim, specific recognition of a pattern confirming itself. Something in me went very clear and very still. And his supervisor? Lieutenant Raymond Voss. He signed off on both closures. My father picked up a pen and set it back down. The only visible sign of what he was actually feeling. I've spoken to our attorney, I've spoken to my communications director, and I've spoken to Patricia Osei, who has offered her footage voluntarily. A pause. There is also a 15-year-old named Darius Washington who filmed the entire encounter from the beginning, before Holt even approached you. His mother has already called the office. I looked at him. "You've been busy." "I've had 45 minutes, he said, which was not a boast. Just a fact about my father. That night I didn't sleep. I lay in my childhood bedroom staring at the ceiling while the house settled around me and my father's voice carried up through the floor in low, steady intervals until well past midnight. My phone had become unreadable. The notifications had long since stopped meaning anything individually, folding into a single ongoing volume of response. The video had passed 3 million views by 10 p.m. By midnight, 2 prior complaints were appearing in published news articles, found by reporters who were faster than anyone had anticipated. At 3:42 a.m., I picked up my phone and texted my father, "I want Damon and Antoine involved in whatever we do next. This should not just be about me." He replied at 3:44, "Already found them." Both said yes. I put the phone down and for the first time since the morning, fell asleep. 3 days later, in a conference room at a civil rights law firm in downtown Sacramento, I met them. Damon Reese, stopped in 2021 for allegedly jaywalking while carrying his nephew's bicycle, detained 31 minutes, complaint filed and closed. Antoine Webb, stopped in 2019 outside his own apartment building for matching a description, detained 45 minutes, complaint filed and closed. Both men had moved on in the way you move on from things the system tells you weren't worth anything. Carrying it somewhere interior, somewhere that costs you something every day you carry it. Damon had careful eyes and a stillness about him that spoke of weight carried quietly for a long time. Antoine arrived 10 minutes late in his work jacket, shook my hand with a grip that said more than either of us put into words. Patricia Osei joined by phone. Darius Washington's mother had sent a notarized copy of his video with a letter that the attorney read aloud, and the silence it left when she finished was the kind that changes the temperature of a room. The legal structure was straightforward. Unlawful detention, racially discriminatory enforcement, a documented pattern across 7 years and 3 victims, a supervisor who had signed off on the burial of 2 prior complaints despite evidence that, as our attorney put it with the dry precision of someone who has done this for 20 years, would not have survived 30 seconds of good faith review. "What does Holt know?" my father asked. "He knows the video exists. He's on administrative leave." The attorney paused. "He doesn't know about the civil action, and he doesn't know about Damon and Antoine." My father looked at me. "He finds out at the press conference," I said. The press conference was held on a Thursday, 11 days after Clement Street. The steps of the state capitol, my father's choice, deliberate and loaded with every implication of institutional accountability it was meant to carry. The April sun was direct and warm. My father stood at the microphone in his gray suit, Damon to his left, Antoine to his right, and I stood 1 step back, because this day was not supposed to be only about me. My father did not raise his voice once in the 15 minutes he spoke. He never does. He laid out the 3 incidents. He named Dennis Holt. He named Raymond Voss. He cited both prior complaints by case number. He read briefly from Darius Washington's mother's letter. Then he stepped back, and Damon Reese stepped up. Damon was not a polished speaker, but he was precise and quiet, and he did not look away from the cameras once. Antoine's voice broke in the middle of a sentence. He stopped, looked down, collected himself, and continued. And the silence in that pause held more power than anything a speechwriter could have built. When my father returned to the microphone, his final words were quiet and exact. 3 men, 7 years, 2 buried complaints. 1 officer permitted, by the system responsible for oversight, to continue without consequence. This is not about one officer's behavior. This is about what we choose to do with knowledge of that behavior. Dennis Holt was terminated 4 weeks after the press conference following a departmental review the police commission voted to make public. Lieutenant Raymond Voss was formally censured and removed from supervisory duties. Insufficient in the view of several people I respect, but a consequence that had not existed before, now on record, now following him. The civil action settled 16 months later for an amount I'm not able to disclose, which our attorney described, without irony, as significant. Patricia Osei texted me the morning after the press conference. I almost didn't stop. Then a few seconds later, glad I did, I saved both messages. I look at them sometimes when I need a reminder of how thin the margin is, between the version where someone films it and the version where the complaint goes into a drawer, and the pattern continues into its 8th year. I graduated in May. My father sat in the 3rd row and didn't check his phone once during the entire ceremony, which, for a sitting state senator, is an act of profound, deliberate love. I took a position at a civil rights policy organization in Washington 6 months later. The work is not glamorous. It is mostly filing records requests, cross-referencing complaint databases, looking for patterns that look like what I now know to look for. Slow work. Necessary work. The kind that doesn't always end on capital steps, and usually ends in a document that may or may not be read by someone with authority to act on it. But sometimes, the documents are enough. The scooter is in my garage in Washington. The physical title cleared 4 days after Clement Street. My name, the serial number, the state seal, and I filed it in the folder on my phone behind the bill of sale and the transfer confirmation in Trevor's emails. The scratch on the left footboard is still there. I've thought about getting it buffed out and haven't. I don't think I'm going to. My father called the evening of my first day at the new job. We talked for an hour about nothing important, his garden, a book, the general business of being alive and related to each other. At the end, just before hanging up, he said, "You doing okay, son?" I looked out the window of my Washington apartment at the city going gray-blue in the evening, and I thought about a brick wall and cold metal and a folder on a phone and everything that had followed from it. Damon's careful eyes, Antoine's breaking voice, a woman in a yellow coat who almost kept walking. "Yeah, Dad," I said. "I'm okay." A comfortable pause, the kind that doesn't need filling. "I know," he said. "The scratch on the footboard is still there. Some things you keep,